Excellencies, distinguished delegates, my topic this morning is building trust in artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk about 4 specific things. Firstly, why do we need trust? Secondly, regulatory techniques for building trust. Thirdly, professionalisation. And finally, I'll come on to a topic which has been mentioned a few times already, that is the insurance of artificial intelligence and how that can contribute to building trust. Really, what I'm going to talk about can be boiled down to 2 things. Why do we need trust, and how can we create it? So firstly, why do we need trust? Underlying the adoption of any new technology, it's essential that the people who are using the technology trust it. It's essential that they are willing to adopt it. And the key point is that you cannot legislate to create trust. You cannot simply pass a law saying people must trust artificial intelligence or people must trust another new technology. Trust is a feeling which comes from within. And so we need to have a much more sophisticated way of looking at matters in order to be able to create this feeling. The European Union explains this in one of their publications concerning artificial intelligence. And they say that trust is not something that just has to be about one particular component. For example, when we're thinking of aeroplanes, we don't think about the trust of the engine or the trust of the wings, the trust of the tail. We think about the trust in an aeroplane as a whole. And that's the way we need to think about artificial intelligence as a whole. Not just one component, but the entire use of all the technologies which contribute to it. And we've heard already that there are many different technologies that may be involved. Trust involves a number of different factors, and they all are connected to each other. So, for example, we have consumer confidence in technologies which affect members of the public. There is there's social trust, which can come from people being confident that their jobs will not necessarily be taken by artificial intelligence. And as Minesh has mentioned, I agree with him that perhaps fears about everyone's jobs being taken are exaggerated. I don't think it's that likely. But again, people need to understand and be told why this is the case. Safety and business security are also important, as well as foreign investment. And for Dubai, that is an important thing, as it is for many other economies. We need to not just have trust internally, but trust in other countries who will then want to come and invest. There are a number of different regulatory techniques that you can use to create trust. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this. In fact, the regulatory technique which will be best for creating trust is one which is well suited to the particular country that you are in. Different countries have different ways of creating trust. So, for example, in Switzerland, it is very common to ask the people to hold a referendum when there is an important political question. And there are many referendums, many public votes on political questions each year. Whereas in other countries, we have different ways of creating trust. Perhaps there is a ruling council. Perhaps it comes from asking wise leaders. So the ways of creating trust differ from country to country. I'm now going to talk about successful ways and unsuccessful ways in which trust has been created or failed to be created in other technologies. Although AI is new as a technology, there have been many other technologies in the past which raise similar difficult ethical questions for society. And so we can learn, with regards to AI, what we have done in the past in this regard. One good example of the way that trust was created in the past is in the UK with gene editing techniques. So this is a series of technologies which allow the opening up of a genome of plants, of animals, of humans, understanding the blocks from which we are all built, and then manipulating them in order, for example, to create better crops, to create crops which can survive in very hot weather, to create crops which do not get destroyed so easily by parasites. And this can be done by changing the way that they are built. However, this is a controversial technology. It has many very helpful uses. It can alleviate hunger. It can reduce irrigation costs. But many people say that it is interfering with nature, that there is something wrong, there is something dangerous about changing the way that plants or animals are built. And so, in the 1970s, when these technologies were first developed in the United Kingdom, the government created a commission built together of many experts, lawyers, doctors, scientists, people from different religious groups, people from civil society, and they asked these experts to come together and help the government to create laws that everyone would be able to trust. And it was important that the experts, when they released their report, in their conclusions, they said that not everyone is going to trust, or not everyone is going to agree with the answers that the government will come up with. It's natural in a society that people have different views, and you cannot make everybody agree. But what everybody can agree on is the way in which an answer has been reached. And so if people have faith, if people have an ability to see that their views are being listened to, even if their views are not being implemented, then that will make them trust in the overall integrity of the system. And so the UK created a new public authority called the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, which continues to this day. It regulates the sector. And as a result of the UK's world-leading creation of this particular regulatory body and the way in which they built public trust, the UK has been able to generate a huge amount of international investment, and it's one of the world-leading countries in human fertilization and embryology and other types of gene editing technologies. So this is an example of where if you build the trust, then you build the economic benefits of the technology following from that. There are also bad examples from the past. So genetically modified crops in Europe are not so popular. It's very difficult to grow genetically modified crops in Europe. Whereas in America, genetically modified crops are very much trusted and very much used. The main difference for this is in America, they created trust at an early stage. They spoke to people at the very beginning. And so in America, 70% of some of the main crops like corn are grown using genetic modifications. But in Europe, it's almost none. So this is an example of where Europe has done things much worse. And the key thing is to build trust at an early stage. It's no good telling people all of the benefits of a new technology after it is already created. This needs to happen at the beginning. Unfortunately, for artificial intelligence, we are at the beginning, so there is this opportunity right now. Another technique of creating trust is to have what's known as a regulatory sandbox. This is something that has been used in particular by financial regulators in order to allow developers of new technology to test out their technologies in a way which is safe, in a way where they're not going to have regulatory sanctions or fines. So this allows the developers of the new technologies, the entrepreneurs, to have some security and to have some understanding that they won't be punished for using their new technologies. And also, it allows the regulators to understand what these technologies are and to be able to see how best they can be regulated. So it is a good example of interaction, of coordination between the regulators and the developers. The other option, if you don't have a sandbox, is you just say to developers, whenever you want to release your product, you release it, and then if it's compliant with our laws, fine. If not, we sanction you. But if you do that, then many developers might say, well, we're too scared to release our product, so you never have this innovative product being released. There are further techniques of building public trust in new technologies which have been used in other countries. One important example is public education, and some countries, particularly the Scandinavian nations, are now seeking to educate their populations from a very young age in artificial intelligence, through schools, through early years education. It's also important to educate the working population in artificial intelligence. This is something that Singapore is seeking to do in particular. One of the other things that I do personally is teach a course in Singapore run by the government for professionals in lots of different sectors in using and understanding artificial intelligence. It's important that not just the AI experts, not just the programmers understand artificial intelligence, but actually everybody in society, everybody in the economy who might be interacting with it can understand it, at the very least at a basic level. Another good technique of allowing people to understand AI can come through a new technology, which is using the internet. So there are some good examples of testing out ethical frameworks online to ask people what answer they would come to. There is a famous experiment online called the MIT moral machine, which asks people, if you have a self-driving car and somebody steps out in front of the car, who should the car prioritize? Should it be the person in the car, the passenger, or should it be the person crossing the road? What happens if the person crossing the road is an old person? What happens if they are a child? What happens if they are a famous scientist? So there are lots of different permutations of this problem. And what the online test does is it looks at how in different societies people have different answers for these problems. So if you have a government which is looking to work out what should the answer be if there is a legal case, and we've heard discussion already of the Uber case where a pedestrian was hit, these types of online studies can help governments, can help the judiciary to understand where they should calibrate their answers to these very difficult questions. Crowdsourcing and understanding from the particular interest groups, whether they are business, whether they are civil society, what values they have, is a technique which is already being used by various organizations with regards to artificial intelligence. The IEEE, which is a technical body around the world that sets many thousands of standards which we interact with all the time. For example, Wi-Fi is a standard of the IEEE. They have their own standards for AI, and they are currently piloting their new ones by asking lots of organizations and lots of bodies around the world what they think they should do. So it's important that standards not just be top-down, but also that they be bottom-up. If you just have a top-down standard, which is set by government, set by judiciaries, without asking people, without understanding how it's going to work in practice, then you might get the right answer, but you might also get the wrong answer. Whereas if you have a process where you are having discussions, upwards and downwards, that is more likely to be successful in this regard. It's important, in my view, that we have not just sector by sector rules for artificial intelligence, but that there should be some principles for artificial intelligence which apply whatever sector you're in. So what I'm saying here is that instead of having one set of rules for self-driving cars, one set of rules for AI in medicine, one set of rules for AI in finance, and perhaps all of these rules are different, there should be certain rules at the top which apply wherever you're using AI. Now the picture you see up on the screen is of a snack which we have in the UK. I don't know, maybe if you have it here, it's called a Jaffa cake. This is a good example of why it can be foolish to have different types of regulatory regimes. There was a big court case in the UK about this type of snack. And in this court case, there was an argument about whether this was a biscuit or whether this was a cake. Now, why is it important whether this is a biscuit or a cake? The answer is that biscuits are taxed differently from cakes in the UK. So biscuits cost 20% less than cakes. So this is an example of where we had two different regulatory regimes over something which was essentially, it could be either. If you have many different regulatory regimes for AI, there will be these types of disputes, whether something is type X or type Y. And ultimately, you can spend lots of money on these disputes. They waste lots of time, lots of government effort. Instead of having these disputes about whether something falls into one sector or another sector, instead it's better to have a single set of regulatory principles which apply to everything across the board. Now, sometimes you will need specialized rules, but having overarching principles is also compatible with having specialized rules. So to give an example from areas of law that we're already familiar with, the law of contract is essentially the same whether you are a doctor or whether you are a policeman. The law of contract is the same for you. There is still different regulation for doctors and for policemen, perhaps, but the law of contract is the same. And we can have similar things with artificial intelligence. Some of the areas where I would suggest you can have a common rule for artificial intelligence are up on the screen. These might include there must be identification of where AI is being used. So if AI is being used in order to make a employment decision, perhaps you should always tell the person that AI is being used in that regard. Another example is to have an off switch always, so some ability to turn off, to interrupt the functioning of the AI if it is going wrong, if it is malfunctioning. That's something which you would want in every area AI is being used. Explanation and transparency, I will come on to talk about. Minesh is going to give a presentation on bias later this afternoon, but again, these are all examples of requirements for AI which you would want to have wherever the AI is being used. It does not matter which particular sector. This is also important when you bear in mind the way in which AI technology works. Today, although we mostly have narrow AI, it is increasingly becoming like general AI. That is to say, one type of program can do many different tasks. So the IBM ROS platform, which Mr. Tanner mentioned earlier, which can identify and understand a legal question that you ask, that same program is also being used in diagnosing medical disorders. Just as you can ask a legal question, you can also ask a medical question. So you can see that you have one technology being used in multiple different sectors. It does not make sense to have a different set of rules for every sector where the technology is being used. Explanation and transparency is a particularly important value in AI systems. There are many ethical codes, many regulatory standards for AI around the world, which, as Mr. Tanner mentioned, are usually not binding at the moment. All of them, interestingly, regardless of which country, whether it is Singapore, China, EU, US, they all mention explainability of AI. But, as we have discussed, one of the problems with explainability for AI is that AI is not necessarily transparent. Sometimes it is a black box where humans cannot understand how the AI has come to an answer. And this is perhaps to be expected, because one of the reasons why we use AI is because it thinks differently from us, because it can think better than us. But there are some techniques which are now being used in order to provide some kind of explanation, and we we'll need to think about what type of explanation we will want in which context. So one popular technique is called counterfactual explanation. Counterfactual explanation. This says to the AI system, what answer would you have given if we had changed one particular parameter? So if you're asking, for example, about an employment decision, the AI system might be able to say, if the candidate was a woman, then they would have been selected. Or if the candidate had a degree, then they would have been selected. So what you're doing is you're isolating the differences between different candidates, and the AI system is able to say what the situation would have been if you change those particular variables. It doesn't necessarily explain quite how the AI system made the decision, but at least you have some form of information which can then help you to perhaps reprogram the system or to understand why it has functioned in the way that it has done. One important thing to bear in mind with explanations is that you don't necessarily always have to have the same level of explanation for every use of AI. And in fact, there are studies, empirical studies, which show that the public do not expect to have the same explanation. So the UK Information Commissioner's Office, that is the data protection regulator in the United Kingdom, did a series of studies where they asked people if there is a trade-off, which there often is, between accuracy, getting the right answer, and explainability, understanding that answer, how would you strike that balance? And the findings were very interesting. The findings were, in a medical context, people want AI to be accurate. They don't care so much about understanding how the AI came to that decision. They say, if the AI can tell me whether I have cancer up to 90% accuracy, then I don't mind if I don't know how it's told me, because it's too important. It's a life or death diagnosis by the AI, and so I don't mind about understanding. In other areas, though, for example, in employment, people said, actually, I want to understand the employment decision, and maybe if sometimes the algorithm gets the wrong answer about employment, that is not so important. What is more important is the explanation. So we can see here that having a contextual approach is actually what people want. They don't want a blanket rule. One of the difficulties with the way that the EU has regulated for AI in the GDPR is that it might create a blanket rule, depending on how it is interpreted. And so countries which are starting without a similar set of legislation, like the UAE, may be able to create a slightly more better fit for the way that AI is actually used, a slightly more attenuated rule for AI. Singapore has a good set of rules in this regard, which I think are better than the EU ones. The next topic for creating trust is professionalisation. Why do we trust doctors? Why do we trust lawyers? Why do we trust airline pilots? The main reason is that there are professional organizations for all of these bodies. In order to be a lawyer, you must pass the bar. You must understand the ethics which are set by your jurisdiction. Similarly with doctors, you would not go to an unlicensed doctor to be treated. You want to go to a doctor who is registered. My suggestion is that we need a similar type of thing for those who are doing AI engineering. AI is now able to take some incredibly important decisions about our lives, just as doctors, lawyers, pilots, architects are. And so we would also want AI engineers to have this same level of regulation. There are a number of building blocks of professional regulation. Doctors swear a Hippocratic oath. This is an oath that they shall do no harm, which has been used since the ancient Greeks and is used around the world. We may want to have a similar basic level of ethics for those who are creating AI. We can use certain bottlenecks in order to be able to create this level of professionalization. You may say that there are so many people who are creating AI engineering, it's too difficult to regulate them all. But actually, there are certain things which almost all of them will do. So almost all of them will attend university somewhere. Usually you need to have a degree in order to have the level of detailed knowledge to create artificial intelligence. So as part of one's degree, it would be possible to create a certificate that people must pass in order to receive their degree. This could be made part of a computer science degree, for example. It could be made compulsory within a country that AI shall only be used, or perhaps it shall only be used by the government, if the designers of that AI, if the programmers themselves have got this particular qualification. And you can have national level qualifications which feed up into global ones. So for example, in law, in the US, there is a New York State Bar Association that everybody registered in New York as a lawyer must be part of. There is the American Bar Association, and then there is the International Bar Association. You could have a similar level here. You might have the Dubai AI ethical regulators, you might then have the UAE ones, and so on and so forth. It's also important to think about the members of the public who are using AI. Where we have members of the public who are using a potentially dangerous technology, we often require them to have some degree of qualification. So in many countries, in fact in most countries around the world, it is required to have a driver's license. You must pass a proficiency test in order to drive a car, because a car is a powerful piece of technology which could cause harm if you don't understand how to use it. Similarly, we may want to think about having a driver's license for artificial intelligence. So you would not need to have the same level of qualifications as a professional who is designing AI, but increasingly, as members of the public, as people in businesses are using AI and interacting with it, you may want to have a requirement that they pass some form of small but important test in order to make sure that they understand what they're doing and what the consequences could be. We've spoken a lot about liability for AI if it goes wrong, but these are all techniques which prevent AI going wrong in the first place. And that is particularly important because most harm is prevented not by laws which prevent the harm and not by punishments, but actually by having structures which stop the harm happening in the first place. The final topic I'll talk about is the compulsory insurance of AI. Now, this isn't a complete answer to all of the issues that AI can lead to, but it is another way of creating trust. So, in lots of countries, there is compulsory insurance for driving. This allows people to trust that if they are injured by another vehicle, then there will always be someone who can pay for the harm that is caused. They don't need to worry about suing the individual driver. There will be an insurer who has lots of money, lots of funds, who can quickly pay out without asking too many questions. We may want to have a similar thing for artificial intelligence. So as you've heard from Mr. Tanner, and I'll mention in my next presentation later this afternoon, we have that system already in the UK. And in fact, in the UK, we were the first country in the world to create a system of compulsory insurance for AI in cars. The European Union has also considered having AI insurance. There are two types of insurance. There's first party, which covers the person who's using the AI, the person who's using the technology, and there is third party, which cover other people who may be harmed. what I would suggest is that first party should probably be a decision of the individual using AI, but third party is something which is more important to society, and so third party insurance would be one of the things that a country should look at first before requiring that people insure themselves. We should allow people to, if they want to take a risk, they should take a risk with themselves, but taking a risk with other people, perhaps that should not be allowed. Finally, there are countries which have insurance for everything, not just for cars. New Zealand is an example of this. Instead of having tort law to require that whoever causes harm makes good that harm, they have a system of compulsory insurance across the whole country, the Accident Compensation Commission, where the government has a state-backed scheme which is contributed to by taxes from different industries, and if somebody is harmed, the government simply pays out, so it is no fault. The government doesn't ask who was responsible here, who was responsible there, was it the programmer, was it the user, all of these complicated questions. They simply avoid them by having the government paying it out. So this is another potential solution to the issues of AI, but it's not a perfect solution. It's not a solution for everywhere. New Zealand is a small country. The compensation doesn't apply for economic losses, so it's not a total solution. But again, it's something which one may want to consider in order to create the overall structure for ensuring trust in artificial intelligence. So thank you very much, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
شكرا لكم على هذا العرض القيم أيضا. لي سؤال فقط. قد أخرج من مجال اقتصادي إلى المجال القضاء بصفتي دائما قاضية من الجزائر. سؤالي هو: هل أكون مخطئة إذا قلنا بأن الذكاء الاصطناعي في الحقيقة هو خيال علمي لا أكثر؟ قد يكون موضوع الذكاء الاصطناعي فعلا يدفع عجلة التقدم ويكون استخدامه جد مفيد في المجال الاقتصادي، ولكن هل تبني هذه الثقة في مجال الأخذ بالذكاء الاصطناعي في مجال القضاء يؤدي إلى ضرر أكثر من المنفعة؟ شكرا لكم.
Thank you very much for your excellent questions. The first was whether AI is merely science fiction. My answer is yes and no. We have AI all around us. Many times we don't realize. So for example, whenever you open up your phone and start to type a text message, and the phone automatically completes the end of your message for you or suggests what you might want to be writing, that is an example of artificial intelligence. And there are many other similar ones where we are interacting with it. So AI is not just something which is in science books. That said, the AI in science fiction also inspires the technologists of today. So the people who are reading science fiction books and watching films when they were younger are now designing AI, and they often say, well, I saw this in a film, how can we create it in reality? So there is this connection between fiction and reality, which is quite interesting in artificial intelligence. The type of AI that we see in science fiction, where AI is like a human and it is walking around and conscious and has feelings, we don't have that right now. But the AI that we do have, the narrow AI, is nonetheless causing important problems for the world and also creating lots of opportunities. The next part of your question was about AI in the judiciary and whether this can cause more problems than it may solve. I think AI is like many other technologies in that as a technology it is neutral, whether it can be used for good or for bad. And Minesh showed some of the very helpful uses of AI, but there are also dangers in using it too quickly, in using it without public trust, And this can occur in the judiciary as in other areas. The most important thing is that people understand and have faith in the system. If you have a judiciary which is seen, without using AI, as being corrupt or as being not trustworthy or as discriminating against certain members of the population, then the judgments will have less value. So with AI, it's important that we use the same kind of techniques as we use to have trustworthy judges, a trustworthy system of justice, in order to ensure that when it is used effectively, but also that people understand its use and are happy with it being used. I think that may be all the time that we have, but if there are any further questions, I'm very happy to take them in the break. So thank you very much.